They actually know it. Truthfully, they want to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. You should work hard for it instead of just saying, I got this. This works all the time. People who saw a Deep Purple show after 1994 may remember a quiet man standing on the far right side of the stage. Nothing he did, not even looking at the camera or talking, was recorded. But when he moved his fingers quickly, precisely, and with a lot of feeling, you might have thought, who is this guy? In addition, why do I not know about him? This person is called Steve Morse. He's not a legendary musician. There won't be any noise, tricks, or problems. However, Guitar Player magazine called him the best guitarist in the world 5 years in a row. Only 3 other people have ever held that title. He used to practice 10,000 notes every day and write music that was a mix of jazz, classical, rock, and country, like a builder of sounds. When he played his guitar alone in front of a crowd of people who only wanted to see Ritchie Blackmore, he made them feel amazed. Behind that silence is a life made up of weird decisions, a body that hurts more every day but never stops playing music, and a heart that decided to stay out of the spotlight not because it failed, but because it loved someone. Watch on even if you think you know everything there is to know about guitars. Just starting out with Steve Morse's story. Beginnings. Although Steve Morse was born in Hamilton, Ohio, in 1954, he didn't spend all of his youth in one place. His family always moved, from Ohio to Tennessee to Ypsilanti, Michigan, where Steve first learned about singing. But not by listening to pop or rock music like most kids his age do. In the old days, his dad was a minister. Nobody from the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, or Jimi Hendrix lived with them. There were instead hymns and somber, reverent church melodies, music that was both sad and grand. Steve did not fight back. It was great for him to listen to. People might have felt a hint of Bach in Morse's guitar playing even after he had passed away. Mixed up and clean, still and powerful at the same time. Steve, like all kids, needed his own place, though. A safe place of freedom inside his mind. He hid a tiny radio under his pillow so that he could listen to the illegal sounds every night after the lights went out. Music like rock and roll and soul. And sounds from a world that his dad would never approve of. Steve started a band called 3 when he was a teenager. They played at high school parties and church halls. His long, wavy hair that he refused to cut, even though it was against school rules, was what made him stand out, not how well he played. And he was kicked out of school in the 10th grade for one reason only. He wouldn't cut his hair. What looked like the end, though, was really just the start of something much bigger. After finishing the 11th grade at a Catholic school, he was accepted right away into the music program at the University of Miami, even though he hadn't graduated from high school yet. Because of them, Steve met the people who would change his life. The musicians Andy West, Jaco Pastorius, and Pat Metheny were all students, but not just any students. There were artistic aliens among them. And Steve Morse, the boy who had been kicked out, was one of them. He quietly joined the game without being introduced. He played songs and dreamed of Hendrix. Early years, when Steve Morse was at the University of Miami, he wasn't trying to become famous. He wanted to find the musical truth that comes out when all the rules, styles, and formulas are broken down. He never stopped trying new things in labs, workshops, and experimental shows. He mixed bluegrass and jazz fusion, Bach and Southern rock, and the mandolin with distortion. After that, he started Dixie Dregs with his longtime friend and musical partner since high school, Andy West. The name of the band gave it away. It was strange, masculine, rebellious, and impossible to put into any one category. During a time when music needed singing, lyrics, and an easy listening style, Dixie Dregs was a band with only instruments and no singer, where each song was a 6 or 7-minute journey through skill and feeling. No catchy songs to sing along with and no famous people to look up to, just sound, raw and fearless. They signed with the same record company as the Allman Brothers, Capricorn. Free Fall, their first record, came out in 1977, but almost no one bought it. Criticism, on the other hand, saw Morse right away as a genius at writing music. He wrote all 11 songs, and most importantly, he didn't write to please people. He wrote to push himself and the people who heard his music. What If, 1978, their next record, showed a clear change. Rock, folk, and even some classical music are added. Even though it didn't make the charts, the band was asked to play at the Montreux Jazz Festival. a reward for any musical performance. Even so, the market wasn't willing to accept anything that was hard to understand. Capricorn lost all their money. They left the Dixie Dregs behind. No title and no way to go. Arista signed them, and they put out 3 more records. Industry standard, Dregs of the Earth, and Unsung Heroes. Nevertheless, they were always told to return to normal. Arista asked the band to drop their old name and add words. Add a singer. Steve nodded and quietly kept composing the way he always had. Industry standard, 1982, their final album of that era, was hailed as their pinnacle. Guitar Player magazine named it Guitar Album of the Year. Steve Morse was voted best guitarist in the world, kicking off a 5-year reign that no one could touch in the professional guitar community. But behind that rise was a band exhausted by constant misunderstanding. They broke up quietly without a farewell. And Steve Morse, the man just crowned the top guitarist in America, chose to disappear. Career success. After Dixie Dregs disbanded in the early 1980s, Steve Morse didn't fall into the lull that many musicians face after peaking technically. On the contrary, he entered a new chapter of his career, where music was no longer confined to lab experiments, but instead collided directly with public taste. And it was here that Morse began to reveal a rare gift, reviving bands that seemed drained of energy without ever losing his own identity. In 1986, he joined Kansas, a band once famous for Dust in the Wind and Carry On Wayward Son, but now struggling to find its voice after a series of upheavals. Morse didn't arrive as a savior, but simply as a musician who wrote and played with dedication. And that, precisely, is what helped Kansas escape their creative loop. The song, All I Wanted, co-written by Morse, unexpectedly became the band's final top 20 Billboard hit, a reminder that technique and emotion don't cancel each other out, if placed correctly. Though he only appeared on 2 albums, Power and In the Spirit of Things, Morse left a powerful mark, quiet, unassuming, but the one who pulled Kansas away from the brink. That quiet comeback laid the foundation for the biggest decision of his career, joining Deep Purple in 1994, replacing Ritchie Blackmore, a legend who, to many fans, was irreplaceable. There was no role more pressure-filled, but Morse didn't try to imitate Blackmore. He chose to rewrite from scratch. And Perpendicular, 1996, was the statement. Deep Purple wasn't dead, they were evolving. Tracks like Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming, The Aviator, Vavum, Ted the Mechanic brought a fresh, modern tone, rich in technique, yet still rooted in the band's hard rock soul. Morse didn't overpower, he blended in and elevated. Over the next 28 years, Steve Morse would become the longest-serving member in Deep Purple's history, appearing on 8 studio albums, dozens of live releases, and spending more than 2 decades bringing the band to new generations of fans. And most importantly, he did it without ever needing to be the center of attention. He knew exactly when to step back so the music could step forward. Between tours with Deep Purple, Morse never abandoned his dream of pure creative expression, and thus, Flying Colors was born in 2011. This wasn't a commercial venture, but a gathering of trusted artists. Mike Portnoy, Neil Morse, Dave LaRue, Casey McPherson, musicians Steve respected. Flying Colors felt like an intellectual playground where technical skill wasn't for show, but for storytelling. Their debut album reached the Billboard Hard Rock Top 10. Second Nature, 2014, and Third Degree, 2019, were both praised by critics as perfect marriages of prog rock and emotional melody, and Morse, as always, didn't need the spotlight. He was the glue, the invisible backbone of it all. From Kansas to Deep Purple to Flying Colors, Steve Morse has never followed a mold. He didn't conform to expectations. He simply, and quietly, turned weary bands into fresher versions of themselves. Through nothing but dedication, precision, and humility. No applause needed, just the chance to be heard. And somehow he made people listen, even when they didn't know his name. Silent sacrifices and unseen pain. When every note comes with pain and a career steps aside for love. For nearly 3 decades on stage with Deep Purple, Steve Morse never showed that he was suffering. The posture stayed the same, quiet, leaning slightly to the right, guitar hanging just below his shoulder, face expressionless. But behind every downstroke, every seemingly effortless pull of the string was a body screaming in pain. Few knew that for over 10 years, Steve had been silently battling severe progressive arthritis. The joints in his hands, especially the wrists, pinky, and ring fingers, were losing cartilage. Bone grinding against bone. Pain every night. Pain when holding objects. Pain even when doing nothing. And yet, he kept playing, not out of habit, out of sheer will. He didn't complain, didn't cancel shows, didn't ask for sympathy. Instead, he quietly changed everything so he could keep living with his guitar. He built custom muting devices, relearned how to hold a pick, restructured finger movements to relieve pressure on damaged joints. For songs like Too Many Notes, he even changed his entire technique, from picking to fingerstyle, just to make sure not a single note was lost on stage. Playing guitar is no longer just a joy, it's a battle, he once said. But the deepest pain wasn't physical. In April 2022, his wife, Steve Morse, was diagnosed with cancer. No press release, no fundraising campaign, no tears on social media. Steve stayed silent. And by July that year, he officially stepped away from Deep Purple after 28 years, over 1,000 performances, and millions of fans across the globe. He didn't leave to rest. He left to do something few in the rock world have ever done. Choose the one he loves over the stage. I can't keep touring while the one I love needs me most. Short sentence, but perhaps the biggest decision of his life. He left the lights behind, the crowds, a position no one could replace. Steve Morse returned to his quiet home in Ocala, Florida, where he once played guitar in open fields, where his wife was undergoing treatment, and where each passing day became a new kind of note, one of care, of patience, and of love that didn't need words. In a rock world filled with broken love stories, divorces after tours, relationships abandoned for fame, Steve Morse chose the opposite path, and he walked it to the end. Physical pain may have made his hands slower, but not for 1 second did he stop living as an artist, and if it meant trading all glory for one enduring love, he would do it again without hesitation. Personal life offstage, Steve Morse doesn't live like a legend. He lives like an ordinary man. So unassuming that if you passed him on the street, you probably wouldn't guess he once played guitar for one of the greatest rock bands in history. No designer clothes, no flashy cars, no headline-making statements. He resides on a small farm in Ocala, Florida, where mornings begin with tending the garden and late afternoons end with guitar sounds echoing from a self-built home studio. There lives his wife Janine, the woman who stood by him long before any fame and the biggest reason he left Deep Purple without looking back. They don't speak much about each other in interviews. Their love is quiet, complete, and exists much like Morse's music, deep, without the need to be displayed. Few people know that before returning to music full-time, Steve briefly worked as a commercial pilot in the late 1980s. It wasn't an escape from music, but a necessary pause, a detour to reset emotionally. To him, flying was much like playing guitar. It demanded control, emotion, and the ability to see beyond the horizon. That mindset helped him stay grounded, balancing life within the often chaotic, unforgiving world of music. Even years later, he continued flying, not to prove anything, but simply because it felt like meditation, another way of understanding the world. Though private, Morse never disconnected from the community. He continued to teach small classes, talk with students, write instructional books, and share his guitar knowledge through nonprofit projects. He never saw himself as a celebrity, just someone who walked the path a bit earlier and was willing to stay behind to lift up those coming after. He never treated music as a tool for self-assertion. To him, music was a way to exist, and life, without being tied to some note or melody, would feel empty. Now in his 70s, while many peers have retired or withdrawn from the spotlight, Steve Morse continues to quietly create. Not to become more famous, not to make money, but because he simply cannot not create. Just like he cannot stop loving, caring for, and holding on to the things that matter most. Music, a home, and peace. Recent years. Since leaving Deep Purple in 2022, Steve Morse has not stood on grand stages or embarked on grueling world tours. But if you think he's retired, you'd be mistaken. In truth, Morse has never been so busy, so freely busy. He returned to his quiet home in Ocala, Florida, where there are no cheering crowds, no tour schedules, but the sound of nature, the gentle hum of guitar strings each morning. and a home studio where he continues to compose, experiment, and live as a true artist. Throughout 2023 and 2024, Morse quietly released a series of unique projects. He unveiled a collection of abstract visual art pieces with titles like Northern Lights and Plasma Channel, not flashy, but warmly embraced by art enthusiasts and the guitar community alike. Alongside that, he collaborated with Katia Arts to create jewelry from old guitar strings, bracelets, pendants, and Valentine's gifts made from the very strings that once rang out on stage with deep purple and flying colors. For Steve, anything can become art, so long as it carries the breath of sound. And he didn't stop there. In 2024, he published a guitar technique book, accompanied by nearly 100 audio tracks personally recorded by him, a work both scholarly and reflective. Welcomed by the guitar world as a treasure trove, Morse didn't boast about the book. He simply shared. In early 2025, Steve Morse made a surprise appearance on the single Save Me by King's Point, a young rock band from Croatia. No big promotions, no bold credits. He played a short solo, just a few bars, but enough for listeners to instantly recognize that sound was still there, refined, powerful, and achingly soulful. Then in July 2025, he accepted an invitation to teach at Guitar Workshop Plus in Nashville, not as a guest artist, but as a real teacher, sitting down with students, breaking down phrasing, picking, and the note patterns he'd crafted over decades. No microphone, no spotlight, just the guitar, and a man who had lived through glory and grief, now passing on the deepest thing he's ever known: how to play a single note with your whole heart. Now in his 70s, Steve Morse has nothing left to prove. And the most beautiful part is, he keeps going. Not performing out of obligation, not writing to please, but simply because he still has something to say, and he chooses to say it through music. As he always has, legacy and influence. Steve Morse is not a name you'll find on the Billboard charts this month or the next. Nor is he a regular on those glossy guitar legend lists recognized by the general public, like Hendrix, Clapton, or Page. But in the real world of music, where players dissect chord structures, feel the nuance of phrasing, and navigate harmonic layers like invisible architecture, Steve Morse is a landmark. For over half a century, he has brought to rock music something rare: the precision of science, the freedom of improvisation, and the humility of a lifelong student. From the wordless harmonies of Dixie Dregs to the brief but effective revival of Kansas, to Deep Purple's grand transformation post-Blackmore, and then Flying Colors. At every phase, Steve Morse left a mark, quiet but indelible. It's the way he combines world-class technique with deeply emotional music. It's the compositional mind that treats each note as essential, with no room for excess. It's the unwavering refusal to compromise, even in a world that craves simplicity. He is one of only 3 people ever inducted into Guitar Players Hall of Fame, alongside Steve Howe and Eric Johnson, after winning Best Overall Guitarist 5 years in a row. John Petrucci names him as his biggest influence. Sean Lane, once dubbed the fastest guitarist alive, called Morse one of the greatest artists of the era. Even Ritchie Blackmore, the man whose shoes Morse filled in Deep Purple, once admitted, Steve Morse is an extraordinary player. But perhaps what makes Steve Morse's legacy most unique isn't in the titles. It's not even in the technique. It's in the attitude. He represents a kind of artist that is vanishingly rare, one who doesn't live for the spotlight, doesn't pursue fame, and never trades principle for applause. To him, simply playing music is already the reward. And if he had to give up everything just to keep that freedom, he would. Steve Morse didn't change the world with a hit song. He changed the world of musicians. Musicians who, because of him, learned to love every note they played, and to master sound, instead of being mastered by it. And that is a legacy that never fades. Some artists are born to be celebrated. Some chase the spotlight as if it were their reason to live. And then there are those, like Steve Morse, who choose to take a step back. Not because they lack talent, not because they fear confrontation, but because for them, playing music in its purest form matters more than any form of glory. Throughout his career, Steve Morse never tried to become a legend. He simply kept playing what he believed was right. And through that very silence, he became the musician professionals revere, the peer that masters call their equal, and the man that many fans, though late, learned to cherish only after he had stepped away from the stage. Maybe you've heard him play without knowing his name. Maybe you've seen him standing behind Ian Gillan and thought he was just another session guitarist. Maybe you passed him by, mistaking him for an ordinary man in a sea of extraordinary performers. But if you've ever heard, "Sometimes I feel like screaming," and felt your chest tighten during the final solo. If you've listened to Cruise Control and wondered, how can someone play guitar like they're painting? If you've seen a 70-year-old man invent custom gear just to keep playing despite broken hands, then perhaps you felt the deepest thing Steve Morse ever left behind. Not a song, not a technique, but a philosophy. I don't need to be named, I just want to be heard. And if you believe that music is not just to be heard, but to be understood, then many stories like this are still waiting for you here. Stories of artists who aren't mentioned enough, but are worth remembering forever. Follow the channel to keep walking that path with me.